Hi again, this is Greg Ferris of ferrisfirearms.com and cedarridgerange.com. We're going to do a bit of a follow-up video here to give you some information on the types of work that we do on the 1911s. This has been the primary firearm that I've worked on over the many years that we've been in business since the early 80s. And we've gone through a great number of different progressions that may be of interest to our audience out there. We also have to tell you that we do offer all of the features that you're about to see here to you as an individual customer. We want to make a proclamation to you as a customer that we're going to be a little different than most of the other shops. The other shops will give you a list of different options that you can pick from, and many of them are good options and they do excellent work for that particular setup. But remember, they're more into production mode. Here at this shop, customer comes in, customer gets to consult on every single part and every single gunsmithing service. We get to tailor this firearm uniquely to you, and you get to choose all the items that you want or the items that you don't want, and we let you make the decisions. Now if you make a wrong decision, of course I'm going to try to counsel you and try to teach you the way and the why of what your decision is going to imply. But the point here is you get to pick everything, and we're a true custom shop, not like the other guys who just sell you a selection of 3 or 4 guns and call them custom guns. So I work on these firearms. I am the one that actually makes this thing fly for you. So we want to talk a little about the history, and I've got a fairly varied history here because I started very early on in the 80s working on 1911s. Back then, didn't have much of a choice. You had either cheap old Essex or you had the standard, which was the Colt 1911. This was the 70 series, not the 80, and we had to take these firearms and modify them so that the customer could get something more out of them than what the factory had offered. Basics back then were pretty simple. You took and you did a little bit of a flare for the magazine so that you could get it in easier, and you dropped the port on the side of the slide so that you'd have better ejection and you weren't dinging your brass, so if you were a reloader it would make it easier to recover decent brass. And then primary thing was you would do a trigger job and maybe change out to the sights, and there was very few choices on sights back then. You could do the Bomars to give you an adjustable set, and you had to be able to do the milling, which we did. But that was essentially all there was until the wonderful sport of action shooting came along. I got into action shooting both as a competitor and as a person who formed a club, and with the forming of that club, we ended up getting a lot of members who were demanding to have firearms that were actually enhanced over and above what you could get out of the box from Colt or anybody else. So we started doing different things to enhance that. Many of the manufacturers that you see out there now, they actually got their start back in the 80s. Wilson, some of the others, and they started making parts and stuff. And some of them were pretty good, and some of them not so much. Once again, I'll help you make the choice on that. But what we did was we found out that the race was on. When you get into competition, there's a couple of things that you always have to consider. Competition, you want the best, and you want to be the first guy in line with the number one. You don't want to be the person out there with yesterday's technology, because you don't want to give up any advantage to your opponent, because you're testing your skill, you're testing your actual techniques, and if you can get a firearm that will enhance those techniques and enhance your ability to shoot faster and more accurately, that's what you're going to want, and you're going to pay for it. So we've got a number of different things to discuss here history-wise, but one of the biggest things to come along in actual 1911s back in that time period was bowling pin shooting. And in bowling pin shooting, you had your pins, 5 of them on the table, and your objective was to knock them all off the table as fast as you possibly could. And what ended up happening is people found out recovery from shot to shot with a decent ammunition meant that you were slowed down because the recovery of the gun kept you from getting the sights back on the target. And one of the very first developments, and I was not responsible for this, I was just one of the very first ones in this part of the country to start doing them, was what was called the compensator. This became known as the pin gun, or short for the bowling pin gun, because this is where most of the need for this originated. But when people started shooting this type of gun with a compensator on the end to help balance the recoil, when they started shooting that, they found out that it would work very good for the types of action shooting that was coming into vogue at that time, which was your steel challenge was the primary one, because recovery time is extremely important in steel challenge. But also we're starting to see the IPSC. some of the action styles of shooting where you had to shoot and move and actually employ tactics. So the comp gun got involved very fast. A lot of people got on the bandwagon, and I started making those. And we had a number of features that also came into play at that time. As we were progressing, we needed to be able to speed load faster, and one of the earliest things, they back then did not make the add-on mag guides that we have available to us now. So what we did was we made a jig and we heat flared this with the acetylene torch, and we rolled the edges out to give you the actual length of the column that you needed and the ability to put the magazine in with a guide. We also, at that time, started coming out and being able to install the beaver tail grip safeties, because people realized that in order to obtain the recoil you had to be high into the gun, which meant on a standard 1911 Colt, that hammer was going to bite the crap out of you. So the Commander hammers and the beaver tail came into vogue. Another thing, wide safeties, ambi safeties, all came into play. Another thing that came into play, checkering. We started doing checkering. And you can see from the early days, we used to think that you would checker the front of the trigger guard. We don't do that anymore because that's not the way you should be gripping the gun. So that was something the manufacturers still haven't let go of. And then of course, a decent set of sights. These are a buried Bomar set. And this allowed this gun to be shot extremely fast, very accurate, and allowed you to compete effectively. This was one of the earliest ones. This was the number 9 gun that I built. From there, we progressed, and different shooting sports and disciplines came along besides the Steel Challenge. We ended up with the Bianchi Cup. Now, most people who started in Bianchi Cup actually started with a revolver because it was very revolver friendly, and actually there was one event in the Bianchi Cup that allowed you to have a benefit by having a revolver, and that was the barricade event, because you could lean into the barricade and lock your gun onto the barricade and have a very stable platform. Guess what? Can't do that with a semi-auto because the slide moves. Well, I figured I had to learn a way to take that advantage away, because I wanted the semi-auto so that I would have the better trigger pull. Instead of having to shoot double action revolver, I wanted single action semi-auto. So I designed this gun. There's only 3 of these in the world. This is a blowback 38 Super that shoots an extremely light load. It has a lot of different features that came into play about the time that I designed this gun strictly for Bianchi Cup. I'll explain some of them. Yes, I have the full sight here, but for Bianchi Cup, we started shooting that at the time when we were able to then put optics on it, and the aim point had just come out with the red dot. So I put it into my calculations that I wanted to be able to put some sort of heads-up display, a red dot on here, or at least a scope. When I designed and thought this gun through, I did a couple of different things. The basics were there, but I actually now created an add-on piece that I silver soldered on the end. I did one of my first ever scallop check rings. You checker here and scallop here so that you can roll into the gun precisely and stay high on the grip. And you may notice, I don't know if the camera will show you, but when you do the beaver tail, we want to take as much of that material off here and get your hand as deep into this position as you possibly can in order to stay as high in line with the recoil as you can to control the flip. So that was part of the issue. Also, when I did the front end of this gun, it doesn't work like a normal 1911. The barrel does not rotate and lock in and out with the link or a bushing. This barrel is absolutely fixed. I'm not sure the camera can show it to you, but we have a large locking screw here. I had to fabricate this barrel from a blank that originally started as a shilling blank, and it has an extra long barrel hood because this gun cycles so fast it would actually flip rounds out the top on the original barrel that I built because it was kicking them forward so fast. But we ended up with the under support. This is one of the early ones that was out there. They now put them underneath for tactical, which we'll look at later. But this supported my front locking piece. And out here, where all the magic took place, there's a bushing. And this is threaded in there. And it allowed me to change different items and create different features and accessories for the end of this gun. And one of the big accessories that came into play for Bianchi Cup was I now could lean into the barricade, put my hand across the top of here, lock into the barricade because I would have this large extension, and I could sit here and shoot and shoot accurately without my gun recoiling and coming off the barricade. Another thing about this gun is, because it is a blowback and the barrel does not move, it is extremely accurate. I've actually had a half-inch group at 50 yards with this firearm. There's only 3 in the world. It's one of the most expensive firearms that I make, but if you want one, please come see me. Another part of the history was that the IPSC people kind of irritated a series of people within their ranks that formed the IDPA. And IDPA and IPSC kind of got into a contest for customers, and what happened with that is that there were different classifications within each of those sports that tried to copy the other so that they could keep their customers. Well, in IPSC, one of the most popular of the categories that people participate in is called limited, meaning there's a certain number of things that you can do to the firearm, and that sort of allowed you to not have to spend an absolute fortune on your firearm to shoot in the open class. And the limited guns are very popular. It's one of the largest groups, and it's also one of the groups that pretty closely mirrors the IDPA, so that you can have the ability to use a firearm for one or the other and shoot in both of them. Well, I started playing and decided that I wanted to build me a limited gun. Well, back then, once again, we still didn't have the choice of all the wonderful aftermarket slides and frames, so we had to pick according to what was offered. One of the early offerings by Para Ordnance that was interesting was the new extra magazine capacity by having a double column. And on this firearm, yes, I built my own mag guide, soldered it on. I did checkering. This is one of the few times that any time that I've ever done where I did the checkering and then completely relieved all the material around it so the checkering stood absolutely completely up. We have the ambi safeties. Both of the flanges on the safeties have been modified, and if you'll look at this one, you'll see this one's been lowered because I wanted a little bit lower portion here and get a better grip. And you'll notice a custom deal here. That's called a thumb guard, so that when I grip the gun really hard, I don't put my hand on the slide and stop it. The other thing we started doing back then, and there's been a number of versions of these, you can have the extension style. We eventually ended up with Smith Alexander doing the ambi style, and you'll note again, if you watch and look closely, the beaver tail has been completely modeled up and through here, rounded through here, and material removed so I can get as high as possible. And this one is also pinned so that I don't have to worry about grabbing it wrong and not being able to shoot it. This is a hard chrome finish. I did not do that. I have to send that out. I'm not a finish guy anymore. But this was an extremely effective firearm to be able to shoot with, and a lot of these features would play for you. And again, buried Bomar style sight and front sight. From there, there's been many different progressions. You can look at some of the manufacturers that are putting out the firearms now. They've gone to polymers on the low end. You've got the Glock wave that's involved. I can play in that area, but I don't like it. I'm the kind of guy that if I screw up something, I want to be able to fix it. And you can't screw up plastic and easily fix it. So I'm kind of a steel guy, and I've worked in steel and I've worked in aluminum for a long time. So when I have a gun that I want to last or at least outlive me, it's going to be steel. So that's why I've stuck with the 1911. Another thing that we do an extreme amount of work with the 1911 is we have trigger jobs. And trigger jobs can have a number of different setups for the different games, for the different types of firearms that you shoot, whether it's sport, competition, or defense. And we can do all of those for you if you're interested in that. As a matter of fact, one of the big things that has been going on lately is we're getting a lot of people building custom defense guns from scratch. And essentially what that means is it's not completely from scratch for me because I have to go out and get the frame and the slide, but it means that I'm getting oversized parts on everything so that I get to fit completely everything that goes onto this gun. This is one of the ones that we're working on, kind of an interesting firearm here, because we have gotten all the features that the customer wanted on it, and as you'll note, nowadays a lot of people are anticipating that we're going to be able to get to the suppressors and have more access to them. This customer's buying his own and doing the tax stamp. So we have all the features added in, and as I mentioned earlier, here's the tack rail. Now, I'm not a fan of putting together officer's models. Please don't ask me to do an officer's model. They are very limited, and their number one drawback is they're not terribly reliable. So my favorite of all the 1911s, size-wise and use-wise for any purpose other than competition, is going to be a Commander style. So I'm going to recommend that to you. I do like stainless steel. They've managed, unlike the early days where the stainless galled, nowadays they've learned how to match these slides and frames so that they're dissimilar metals and they don't gall anymore, so we don't have any of the earlier problems, and that will allow you to have a firearm that's absolutely reliable. Another interesting thing, these are stabilized wood grips, and I have completely fabricated these grips to blend in completely all the way around the firearm and fit the person that uses its hand. We can do that for you. I've got a couple of customers that are disabled that have had to have custom grips, and we can do that also for you. So if you're interested in that, you can see some of the progression there. I think I've pretty much covered the basics here. I've got a lot of different little features that we would talk about if you come and we discuss your new firearm. And if you want to, you can contact me at ferrisfirearms.com, or you can get to me even through cedarridgerange.com, our shooting range, and let me know. You have an interest, I'll try and explain it to you. We'll have some other videos on some different features. If you want to check back later, thank you very much. Goodbye.